Long distance?
Nobody has expressly said anything.
Okay.
Scott did accept it. That's the only indication I've had.
Okay. Wait just a couple more minutes, see if we get a couple more members here. Sig had indicated it was scheduled around her, so she could be here. Mark's planning on it as well. Adam's on the phone. Yes, sir. What's that? Oh, yeah.
Throw it at us, John.
Yeah. Well, I picked the wrong number. I was thinking of this one, but. It's so much easier. Well, I know, I have, it goes into the shredder right away, otherwise. There's no my files.
Make pencil notes on the iPad. We can actually do that? Yeah, actually. I was just joking about it. Wow. And there's some guys like me, yeah. I didn't say cool.
I just added that.
No, those kids.
Well, they're all the
Do
same.
we have to put 2 chairs between you?
By one of them.
Well, I figured one was. We'll see how the meeting goes.
Now the tests are a pain to understand. I've read it 4 or 5 times. I talked to Deanna. Even they're like, this is not for the general public.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, in terms of the little explanation of how it works.
Yeah.
Oh, that was great.
It's unruly. John hits the secret button. Okay, go. John brought party fans.
Imagine.
That was courtesy of the.
Like after the meeting, John.
Paul brought those, so.
All the green rift ones?
Visual aid.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's no longer green.
All right, well, folks, so we're a little beyond the scheduled time here, and hopefully Councilmember Topcock can show up here. We were expecting her, but besides the members in the room, then we have Adam, Councilmember Martinson on the telephone, or on the Teams meeting, and a few other people in town. I think the city clerk was, I didn't like the reservation he sent out here, which was from 5:30 to 10:30. We spent 5 hours.
Been at this a while.
We spent 5 hours the last time, and I think we're starting to repeat ourselves in the process. So hopefully tonight we can maybe try to be done by 8 if we even have to go that.
Why do you keep looking at me?
And I guess the other thing is we hope and expect, and there's no reason that it wouldn't be a civil conversation this evening. I guess we want to try to avoid personalities to the extent that we can. And then we do have a couple of resources that the council brought in here so that they can advise us as we look at potential options down the road. But I guess I'd ask too that, if you're, making comments or making statements, that you're kind of making it to the council as a whole, not debating with an individual, either between yourselves or between us. So does that sound good to everybody? All right. Well, we got here because we committed to doing this after the last meeting that we had, when we were talking just about one license, and the desire, at least on my part, to have us look at it globally, and not just scoop problems around the town, but see if we can't come up with some constructive changes potentially, whether that be to policy, practice, behavior. I think it's a combination of all of those that are required. So,
Do you mind introducing our guests so that hot water?
oh yes. Well, staff wise, we have the chief and assistant chief with us today, whom you all know. And this is Sam Severin. He is legal counsel out of the, I'm not sure what the name of the office is anymore, but we always call it Brooks Chandler.
Brooks
so.
Chandler office, there you go, yeah, there you go. Glad to be here.
So where do we want to start?
Just so you know, Mayor, we did provide in the packet information because of Kotzebue was discussed a lot. So that is why that information is in your packet. And the proposed, I don't want to say proposed, an ordinance for possible discussion, if you want to look at it that way. And I was asked about how to quantify, potential lost revenues. And actually, you may remember back in the early first couple months of the pandemic, you actually did reduce package store hours from normally 74 hours a week to 55 hours a week. And we saw no change that we could quantify in the amount of sales tax collected from the packaged goods stores. Now, there was an increase, and I want to quantify that because remember, your bars were closed at that point. But it was very interesting that there did not seem to be any discernible change, because that was a question that was asked at the last meeting. And we looked at the month of you limited liquor store hours from March 24th to May 14th. So we looked at the month of April as our comparison of 2020 and where we are in April of 2021.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Okay, thank you, Glenn. I guess that kind of came up because I asked the question, what's the fiscal note associated with making these changes? And it wasn't that, we were looking at things necessarily from the, what's it costing us perspective. Still, it's, I think, good to know that. Besides just what the revenue side is, we could also delve in at some point to our expenditure side of things. And with some changes potentially that reduced sales, it could very well reduce our expenses as well on the thing. So it's a much bigger question than just dollars and cents, and I think we all recognize and appreciate that. As far as actual numbers, because of the protections provided in our code for sales taxes, we're not able to give out sales tax figures for a particular business. And although it's collected on a line of sales, and being there was simply one vendor or one person in that category, those numbers cannot be publicly disclosed. So just to let people know that it's not to hide the number, but it's not something that we're giving out individual stores or businesses sales tax information.
John, can I ask you, what about 2021? We had multiple.
Only for like 1 month at the end in December.
I would, as somebody who deals with numbers once in a while, I hate to say this, but maybe we should look at this without looking at numbers to begin with, because it's really a problem, trying to be a problem-solving thing for the community, and then we'll look at, okay, eventually if we do something, and we have to look at what the effect of that would be, then we cover it with either offsetting expenses or other revenue sources to make up for if it does really reduce. But you really don't know.
No, it was just the city manager was giving us a little bit of information, so I was simply explaining what the limitations were on the information he had provided. So I guess various members of the community may have suggestions as to ways that we can address the issue of that is, I guess, manifesting itself in open intoxication. And I think many of us have our own ideas as to some things what to try that aren't necessarily shared by everybody, but let's put some ideas out on the table, and that'll give us a framework on then can see if we can't come up with the menu or a list of things that will move forward. So I don't know if council members want to start or speak, or if we have lots of folks. Thank you for coming down. So I guess we'll maybe open up the floor to the members in the audience to that have joined us. And I guess we're not going to call you the audience, the participants. So somebody step on up.
All right. So the first problem, I guess, is to decide what you establish what the problem is that you're trying to solve. The problem that we're seeing exhibited mainly on Front Street that has moved a little bit to the other locations as the new location opened up. We've seen a little more of that over there too. Do we have, what are our controls? We have a lot of control over what we can do in terms of making alcohol accessible to folks. we can completely look at that. Earlier tonight, I was looking at a map that the state had of all the different communities in the state and all of the different manners that they controlled alcohol. And there is a really, really long range, or a wide range in them, from using the local option law to having a municipally owned distribution facility being the only thing the Wake City does, to other things, like Anchorage, the larger metropolitan areas that have a large tourist trade. I don't think that any of these, they all have their own problems and their own strengths and their own weaknesses. When I was mayor of Teller, I watched, while I was, during my 25 years in Teller, I watched Teller go from a community that, just as I got there, they exhibited, they did the open option and went to no sale possession, a complete no alcohol, in an attempt to curb the amount of trauma related to alcohol consumption that was going on in the community. And that resulted in a large reduction right away. But over time, it became apparent that it didn't help them adjust to dealing with alcoholism in a constructive manner. It just created almost, while there was an immediate reduction in the trauma, over time, the problems with people importing anyway and getting criminal records, and then when the Barrier Crimes Act came in, it messed up their employment possibilities within the village. And we're talking grandma hauling a couple of 6-packs, and then she can't cook for the kids any longer, and it got kind of silly. So they went to damp. Anyways, and then after being mayor for a period of time, I concluded, coming from that direction, that a community-owned liquor store would probably be the best way for the city of Teller to deal with it. Now, whether or not coming from the other side of where we have bars and liquor stores and whatnot, and we end up at that same position, I guess that's part of what we're here to talk about a little bit tonight. So if we did go to a municipally owned alcohol facility, is that what it would be? Or would we simply be saying, okay, we're gonna now just up a license tax to the current facilities so that we now own them and they're gonna operate under our license with regulations that we stipulate, and they get to use the fact that they get to sell alcohol for this new city scheme at a nonprofit basis, but at least it draws more traffic into their other retail areas. Okay, that's kind of two different schemes of community owned. And so then they may have two very different conclusions. The one may not address a real situation, but give the city more money to deal with the situation. Would more money fix the situation? I don't think that without a whole bunch more money, I don't know if all kinds of money would fix the situation. I think it's something else. So anyway, so then that boils back down to, okay, so if the municipality is going to take it over entirely, we're going to follow the Costa model with the distribution and whatnot. It seems to have worked for them. I pulled up a quick article on them 5 or 6 years after they initially opened. It was now provided 15% of their city's budget, and they were licensing themselves a restaurant bar facility. And some of you may probably know what's happened since then. I didn't really complete following all up on that score yet, but anyway, so I guess there's the range. Someone else?
Thank you, Ken. We'll give people an opportunity to speak a second time, if they wish, after everybody has had an opportunity to speak once. So, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that, and I've gone through this thinking a lot about it, obviously, but the municipality-owned liquor store, I see it. I've talked a lot about this with a lot of people, but I see it as a nuclear option. I think that we're taking steps that are correct, and I think I've immediately seen some effects on Front Street of this pressure, if you want to call it that, that we're putting on open drinking or the availability of sales of alcohol, and we're seeing that, but without anything concrete like what we're hoping to come out of this meeting with suggestions or anything like that, then when there's another manager or when there's another change, it's going to revert back to the way it was without any concrete change. And I hope we do have concrete change. I think reduced hours and reduced days, like Ken Morton had suggested, would make a large impact. And I think the days that it would be down, we would see the impact. But I think there's also health implications there. Luckily, we have a pretty strong healthcare facility that I strongly feel could handle that situation for 2 or 3 days a week if it got to that point for those people that were desperately needing alcohol. I think they'll understand that some people can't function without it until they get the help that they need. In some places they force help, in some places they don't. Alaska doesn't seem to me to be a place that they force help. Does that leave out a population of people that we're talking about? Yes. That just come to town and want to have a good time and on whether it's community center dime or taxpayer dime or whomever's dime, through those facilities. A lot of people benefit from it, but a lot of people, I think, also use that for a way not to spend money, but to reserve it for spending it on alcohol. I think the Kotzebue model is great, but from a business standpoint, I just don't know what the compensation package would look like for those stores that we have. I'm sure it's been done, but there are 9 communities that have package stores ran by the municipality in Alaska. There's a list of about 100 communities that have some type of local option, ranging from, like Ken went over, the municipality owned, completely dry, damp, whatever you see. And the kind of trend of the places, if you look at the map, and AMCO has a map, an interactive map on their website, you can see how that trend goes along the Yukon and up to our region. And those places did that for a reason, because they had a problem in their community. And you look around at when we're discussing this, we have a problem in our community, right? And I think that there's enough individuals that truly care about the future of not only Nome, but their family's ability to be happy here, raising children, businesses' ability to be successful in Nome and bring more commerce to Nome. And so I think that there's a lot of options you have, and I do think, and know that the next election coming up in October is the only avenue for which you would look at a local option, like a package store ran by a liquor or ran by the municipality. But I would hope and I would wait for personally the actions that this body takes leading up to then, because summer's going to hit, spring will hit, and people will get back out on the streets. And if we have a good enough handle on it by that point, then I don't see a need to push a nuclear option of putting it in front of the people to decide what the fate of Nome's package stores are. I also don't know the particulars. Maybe, I can't address legal counsel, but maybe if anybody had the question, if you can separate those 2 types of licenses between the restaurants and bars and leave them alone, and only have municipality ran liquor stores, since there are 2 different types of licenses. But that would be my intent with any type of petition or referendum in that way, would be to allow the bars and restaurants to operate as is, but have a municipality ran liquor store that, one, you're generating a lot of revenue, and two, you're also increasing your control, whether that be through a permitting system for being able to purchase it or not. But I just hope that by June, we're able to see that the changes that you guys make or that the community makes have an effect that's going to last. And that we don't have to look at the option of, is Nome ready for a local option? I know it's been done several times and it gets really heated and it divides a lot of people. And I've already experienced some of that with close friends, and at the end of the day, it's nice because they know I respect their opinion and they respect mine, and tomorrow I'm going to look at them the same way, regardless. And I think that's where I stand on it. I hope you guys can make some concrete changes that lead into the summer of not falling back to where we were, without having to go to an extreme level. I'd like you to have extra revenue to pay for recs and parks and your equipment and your, all that, but is everybody going to bite on that? And is that what's best for the public good? I don't know. That's all I've got.
I guess I'll just answer one of your questions there on can things be separated. There are 22 different license types called out in Alaska statute. And yes, you can break them out separately. We already do that in that package stores operate on different hours than bars do in the community. So that is possible. And definitely an hours thing is an option. And I think I see that Lance is on the phone, and I'm not going to just ask him to respond to it, but I think we should ask Norton Sound directly. We did change the hours here during the pandemic for a period of time, and I think it would be helpful, I believe, to have information on what impact that may have had to the emergency room, both in whether there was a reduction in service requests or if it was a change in what types of issues they saw there. I'm not going to say, change in severity, but how did it impact Norton Sound when we changed those hours? Anybody else interested in knowing that? All right. Lance, you have the floor.
Appreciate it, Mayor.
Thanks.
So very good stats to have, and I'll definitely chase that down because I don't want to start quoting something I haven't looked at in a while. I can tell you anecdotally that we definitely saw an uptick in people coming out to the shelter a lot more than perhaps they were, and staying longer instead of heading downtown at 11 a.m. and so forth. But I think the tail of the tape is also not just in emergency room statistics and so forth. It's in the police calls, it's in the rescue squad calls, and so forth. And so putting all that data together will really tell you your story. I appreciate that. Bottom line, I think limiting hours certainly is a strategy that has value. It's what we do during those hours that really makes the difference. So we can go ahead and we can go 10 hours a day, or we can go 6 hours a day. But it really is, what are we doing during those hours to make sure that people are not getting so much alcohol that they will be carried over until the next day. What are we doing to make sure that the runners don't come in? I've heard some good things that are happening in a couple of the stores, but it's really it's not a all or nothing thing. You can limit the hours, it has an effect, but the other pieces need to be in place as well. I just, I appreciate the thinking here, and I'm sorry I didn't catch who said it. I think I'm looking at the back of people's heads here. But we have to be careful, as was noted, because it's not just, some people can't function without it, some people die without it, if it's just cut off completely for them. And so that's something we always have to be very conscious of in doing things deliberately. And I think when the hours were limited originally, when COVID first hit, through that time period, that was done well, that was planned well, that we were really noting where a lot of the people are, we're going to be, who are chronic and really have these concerns. But there's, let's say at some point, it just goes away, or what have you. It's a real problem. Everything has to be done deliberately. So I think limiting hours works. I think part of the conversation I've been hearing is certainly all the concerns that you see down on Front Street, right? There's a lot of it access down there. And I'll just say that if we want to continue to work towards addressing the concerns that are on Front Street, the more that we can limit the access down there, the more we're going to see some results. Not going to be something that's monumental at the beginning, that takes time to build. But it's controlling licenses. I'm not talking about any kind of closing businesses down and anything like that. Not at all. But what I'm saying is, when we're thinking about licensing, what does that really mean, and what does that impact what's happening down there on Front Street? And I want to point out, I know we talk about the alcohol concerns, but I mean, we have other substance concerns that are playing into this as well. And we've got, and again, this is not a judgment, it's a fact I'm pointing out, is that we've got 4 dispensaries in town now. How many do we need, and what are the locations of those that make the most sense? And again, we have a lot of concerns down on Front Street. Should we be also putting that out there, or should we trying to figure out a way that can be more deliberately selected? So I'll stop right there, Mayor. I don't want to keep rambling on, but that's where my head's at right now.
Thank you, Lance. Just, I guess, a follow on, one of the discussions, I guess, around hours, also are centered around days, and that a little more extreme than just cutting back some hours each day, but knocking out days of the week. And I guess with the I mean, how would if it was changed to, and I'm just going to pick a number here, 3 days a week, what would happen the other 4 days as far as your ability, or it sounded like the hospital and would need to be prepared differently if it was a more radical change in hours than if it was simply a reduction, on a every day of the week type of thing.
Mary, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please, Lance.
I appreciate that comment. I think again, the health consideration needs to be there, for again cutting that access directly off. So you're going to see an uptick in need. We're also going to have to we know who. I mean, here's the thing. We're talking about small percentage of people who have a very chronic issue with alcoholism and dependency, and abuse. I mean, we have a lot of people who utilize alcohol. They do it responsibly. they aren't impacting emergency services and so forth. You have a whole messaging thing there, but that's a whole different conversation. But we're talking about very small percentage of people that we really need to be concerned about if we make these big changes, who could end up very, their health would be very compromised to the point of death. The thing is, we know most of them, we know where most of them are. So I think there's a lot of deliberate planning that can happen that can help protect people. And I would just suggest, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, right? When we go from what we have now to start limiting hours and then eliminate days. We've got a little bit of information and a very small data set of what happened when we reduced the hours. But then when you start taking days off, we're going to learn something new. I would suggest that it's just done incrementally if that's what's going to happen. But I think it can work.
Okay, thank you, Lance, for being there. Council members, do you have any questions of Lance? We brought him in as a resource.
Yeah, no,
I guess when all this was said, it made me wonder too that it's unlawful for an intoxicated person to enter or purchase alcoholic beverages. Alaska statute or regulations defines that as something close to a 0.10. And then we're expecting clerks, as people walk in the door, to gauge whether someone is intoxicated. And, that there are, I think I can say this. I'm aware of individuals that function fairly well at a 0.3, and some higher than that. And so, are the liquor stores and the clerks breaking the law right now by not figuring out? I don't think we can have a breathalyzer in the place by not following the 0.10 standard. Just a question. Paul, go ahead.
Let's see if I remember everything here. I'm going to disagree with Lance just a little bit, and I think that the last time we had a meeting back on Monday a couple weeks ago, the data was provided by the police department that they have about 1,000 emergency services call across the street in one block radius there of 4 buildings on an average for 5 years. 2020 was no different than 2019. And we were experiencing COVID and we had the shutdowns in 2021. We didn't have any difference either. So I think that the numbers are not changing because of the hours. The other thing I can tell you is if you work on Front Street, and there's a couple people in here that work on Front Street an 8-hour day, and they'll tell you at 10:55, depending on the day of the week, if it's close to free check day or paydays or something like that, the line in front of the liquor store will be 7 or 8 people deep or 30 people deep down in front of the visitor center. Doesn't matter if you were to open that liquor store at 10 a.m., 10 p.m. The difference that it makes, and I don't know if you've all heard, my pager has gone off 7 times right now. They're looking to go help somebody out here. That's the impact that it has late in the evening as we've worn our emergency services out. They're not responding to calls. I can point you to a case where a gentleman behind the visitor center was called as an intoxicated person, breathing, not responding. It used to be called drunk down, but we don't use that terminology anymore. And he ended up passing away back there because the police were doing CPR on him finally, and only one person showed up. We're killing people this way, bottom line. So I don't think we're going to be able to close the liquor store. I don't think the community is going to go for that. We need to look at the hours. The later in the day corresponds to later in the day that your emergency services folks are going to have to respond. So if you open the liquor store in the evening time thinking that you're going to catch those people that are coming off from work, Your ambulance department is then gonna be working until 10, 11 midnight at night, and you're gonna have even less response than you do at 6:15 in the evening. I think some thoughts that have come up, limiting the amount of alcohol size and limiting the number of bottles per day that a person can buy. Quite frankly, the liquor stores, the package stores have got to share the data. So if person ABC goes and buys a bottle over here, then they can't go up to Hanson's and buy. And I don't know how the logistics of that would work, because right now, technically, you could get 3 bottles a day by going to the 3 different package stores. And they have got to be in cooperation for wanting to fix what's going on Front Street. And I am hearing in the meetings that I've seen both Laura and Julius in, they want to participate in that. But like Drew said, that doesn't mean the next manager will. I've talked to a manager that was across the street that was all too happy to sell 42 bottles of 1 liter Monarch every single day. So we need to make sure that the city has at least quite got a grasp on what they're allowed to sell and hold them accountable to that. And as the director for the Chamber of Commerce, and I've got some chamber board members in here, the chamber has not met on this. They have not discussed this, but my gut feeling is the chamber is not going to be in favor of government taking over businesses that are in Nome and taking that revenue from private businesses in town. It's really easy to go from dry to a package store where then the government is the only entity. I think it's a whole lot different than taking away, quite frankly, some pretty big revenues for these 3 different stores out here. And so we really need to tread lightly before we go down that path. And I think Drew worded it perfectly. It's a nuclear option. So be very careful of that. Any questions?
So I'm just curious, and maybe it's just me, but I work on Front Street every day, and it seems to me, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me the last couple of weeks it's been really quiet, or at least comparatively speaking to what it was before. And I guess from an ambulance perspective, and maybe I'd throw it to the police chief as well, I haven't seen an ambulance on Front Street for a while. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right spot or the right time, but it just seems to me that the numbers are way down, and sort of all the incidents that we used to see on a daily basis, at least for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I haven't been seeing that. And I don't know if you can comment on that from a ambulance perspective.
So a gut feeling that I have on that is, this became a topic, and I really do think that AC took seriously their role in what they need to be doing down there. And I think that they have definitely started to take that a lot more in earnest. And I think that absolutely plays in, which is a good thing. That shows that with controls there, whether it's self-imposed, which they never last long. We've done self-imposed, getting rid of the smaller bottles and some other things in the past, and that wanes, by the way. But if this council can put in some controls, I think that we'll absolutely see an effect of that. I will tell you that our paid ambulance person is out of town right now, so the police have been taking some folks to the hospital, which is really not the best method. They really should be in an ambulance because they do need medical care and not just a taxi cab ride when they're intoxicated. So that's very important. And Lance is absolutely correct. There are other drugs out here. We've got kratom that's like an opium, but you used to be able to buy it on Amazon. It's a legal drug that gets mixed into things at certain times of the year. I don't know how much marijuana is playing into the conditions on Front Street. When we have certain individuals, when they're drinking on Front Street, they're absolutely horrific to deal with. When they are smoking marijuana, they're very pleasant to deal with, and they are not abusing people. 7, 8 years as an Alaska State Trooper in this region, I would much rather go to a village where they're smoking marijuana than going to where they're drinking alcohol. Drinking alcohol, people end up having sex with their grandkids. They're smoking marijuana, they're fighting over Doritos. Literally, it's pretty benign. So, but the marijuana is a gateway drug, so it definitely needs to be taken serious. So I think Lance raises a good question, but my observations is that's not the worst of the drugs, but when you start getting into kratom and opium and heroin and cocaine and the other stuff, absolutely really affects these folks down. Everybody, really, the whole community.
So the number of calls has decreased, and maybe I'd open it to the police chief or not, because that's what I'm trying to get at. Because if they are, as it appears to me, then what are we doing right, or what has changed? Because this is a good thing.
And that's what I guess I'm trying to get at. You said maybe calls haven't changed, they're just transporting folks differently?
A little bit. I mean, my pager still goes off a lot, for ambulance calls, and they're constantly looking for people. But I agree with you, working down on Front Street, I don't see the people in the post office as much. And I've actually had people reach out to me. Now, it is now the first of the month. Things might change because the money becomes available at the first of the month. And we were in a lull between the 17th of the month and then.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. If there was a change, what caused that? Because that's a good thing.
I really do think that AC has stepped up their game. I really do. And I think that if we can continue down that path, I think we'll see more of that. I really do think they've done.
So if they are restricting sales or being a little bit more tighter, that's a good potential solution.
I believe so.
Okay. Do you agree, Chief?
Absolutely.
So the calls have decreased in the last 2-3 weeks, you
I don't
think?
know if it's the weather or what, but I don't knock it.
Ambulance calls and police calls, but especially ambulance calls have dropped at least in half, and we're not exactly sure why. We don't know whether it's weather related or whatever. But I will say that normally when I've talked with the ambulance staff, once we see the monthly checks hit the bank, then we see more calls. So, right now was February 1st yesterday, and, they come in a period of about a week. So, yes. But calls are down, and we're not sure exactly why.
It's always a conglomerate of a reason. There never seems to be just one factor.
An amazing coincidence.
I was just wondering, I know I've voiced my opinion several times. I think we made a mistake by putting the police station out where we did without having any presence downtown but has thought been put into possibly having somebody down there putting more of a deterrent between 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock, pouring out bottles and things. And because it seems like if there was more of a deterrent, then it'd be less inviting to come to Nome to realize that you can go there and drink outside when it's against the law to do that.
I'll let the chief.
And then we might have, and I know that's time, I know that it's a time constraint and money, because then you have to pay people to do that. But on the other flip side, maybe there wouldn't be 1,000 calls on the backside of picking people up that are already, we wouldn't have some of the issues that we have.
I'll let the chief answer that directly, but I do know that the police department has been advocating for a community policing officer, and that would actually be a big part of that role, is from what I've seen and the writing on it. And I think that it absolutely, but it not only takes time and money, it takes time and money to get them hired and get them trained and get them out into the field. And getting police officers hired takes time. So.
Thank you, Paul.
Andrew,
Respond to Mark or say something to Mark's comments. Okay. When I first took over at the visitor center as the director, one of my immediate thoughts was, if I can't control the situation around me, what can I do? Because I can only control my actions as the director of that place. And I actually put out the thought, and I did talk to many people about it, but of it being a city-owned building, having the CSOs or whatever type entity in that building and moving the visitor center. In my mind, the visitor center and a liquor store side by side doesn't work. But if the visitor center was next to the state-of-the-art museum or the library or something where it's already moving that way, it's there, and you can replace that in a city facility with a police presence right in the middle of it, yeah, you're still talking lots of money. But that was one of my very first thoughts when I took over as the director of the visitor center. But it's a huge undertaking, and I don't know what that would look like. But that was one of my very first thoughts when I took over there.
Thank you. You're not the first one that suggested that. Chuck.
Thank you. It's very sad that a small group of individuals can affect this town in very bad ways. When we had the mom and pop liquor stores, everything was smooth. People, sure, we had our people that overdrank, but they had a home to go to. no one in Nome at that time enabled them to drink. You see this now. This whole community is enabling the small portion of people to drink. We, you, us, were providing customers for them. And what they sell, we all know what the problem is. So I'm in favor of a city-owned packaged liquor store and let the bars and restaurants do their thing. I think we need control. And with city-owned, I think the control would be there. We should post a sign, we reserve the right to sell to anyone. You don't see that anymore. Why? Big businesses here. And when Scott mentioned that AC, a $2 billion, I said, wow, amazing. But then I went online and looked at Kroger. In 2020, their sales were 70, can't remember that word, 70,000, 70 million. No, not any of those, but 70.
You're not losing it.
Million. I'm glad we can laugh. Let's be serious. $70 billion. If we close down that store, the store out there, Hanson's, this won't even affect their bottom line, I doubt. It's like pushing a fly off your forearm. So, and I think there's advantages and benefits to this community if we have a city-operated package store. When the fire department and the utilities went together and said, let's light up Front Street. And members of the department went around and asked for donations. We did not get a no answer from local owned businesses. But when you went to Hanson's, you went to AC's, total disregard. And I think they don't give a darn about the welfare of our people, this whole community. So again, big business is here. And what we do locally, we have to be united. And I think we can unite the people to vote those licenses out. ACs, how many licenses do they have? Anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess? How many? Three. Okay, 3. I just talked to John earlier. Put one more finger up. 4.
It hasn't died quite yet, I don't.
Not done. I thought it was done. I thought it was done.
Yeah, but they can afford to let it die. We can't afford to let our people die. Our people are dying on the beach. One individual that frequented Nome many times, that person would come to Nome, do her thing, go back, and guess what? That person finally died of cirrhosis of the liver. we have to put value on these people's lives. But the big businesses, they put value on the dividends so they can pay their shareholders. And that is very disgusting. Do they really care about a homeless person dead from cirrhosis of the liver? I just mentioned that. Or a homeless person dead on the golden beach of our home, Nome? So I'm advocating that Nome citizens consider a city-owned packaged liquor store and eliminate the licenses owned by Hanson's and AC. We have to value life and well-being of the homeless person that loses self-control after that first taste of alcohol. We have to prevent possible harm or death because of that individual consuming too much alcohol. I had one more piece here, but I'll come back again, or I'd like to come back up again. So the community, we have to get together, have public meetings, get everybody out, get their thoughts, everyone's thought. And if everybody agrees to close the, eliminate the licenses, fine. If they decide to leave them there, I guess we have to be fine with that too. And I think we can do it, Nome. This year should be the time we take action. A little bit of other facts. 7 states, Alabama, Idaho, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Utah, Virginia, have state-owned liquor stores. 7 states. 17 states are alcoholic beverage control, and those states have monopoly over liquor sales, liquor wholesales, and liquor retail. 117 cities in Minnesota operate 213 municipal liquor stores. If they can do it, no one can do it better. And people talk about, well, the management. Look at our relationship, and Drew brought it, that the city of Nome has relationship with the school district. They run their own business. The utilities does their thing. So this city-owned liquor store can be pretty much separate from the city oversight. The city-owned liquor store would have their own board of control. And having, I think, local individuals on that, whoever, I think that type of business could function and provide many benefits to the community that we are really not aware of. We see the need out there. We see the high school students going around selling raffle tickets, doing other things. Food sales like that. But I think we could instead of having them do that, they can stay home and learn how to read, or stay in school and learn how to read. I just saw on TV that the state legislature is concerned about the reading of kindergarten students. And that's really pleasing, because we need citizens, adults, growing up from children, child age into manhood, womanhood, with the knowledge to be able to read and do whatever. Right now, I think the state, we all know and have seen that there is 64% of the students are failing in reading, writing, and arithmetic. 64%. Isn't this shocking to us? We should be up in arms saying, we have to do something about this. Am I getting off center?
Little bit.
I am, but I think, alcohol has too many bad effects on home life. Poor home life affects the student, the child's ability to learn. So I just feel that, and I feel we should do this promptly. And the council does not have to be involved in it. We individuals, I think there's a lot of people out there that would be willing to organize public meetings to discuss this. So with that, I'll close for now, and hopefully the opportunity to come up again.
One more time. Anybody else back there? Let's give everybody a chance before we invite people to speak again.
I didn't really plan on speaking today, so pardon me, I didn't have anything prepared, but I took some little notes from you guys. So from my perspective, the main points on this are the crime and the hospitalization rates. If anybody's thinking differently, this may not apply. The second thing is that, to me personally, it doesn't matter who sells the alcohol, but rather who gets it and how much. And in that vein, I'm wondering what the benefit would be of a city-run store versus a commercial company, mom and pop store, anybody really, that just runs things in accordance with the regulation. And even if a city store did go in, if regulations weren't in place, then we'd be in the same boat and it wouldn't matter. So with that in mind, just speaking from my own experience here, I don't have any numbers on it. Mr. Johnson probably has better numbers, and I imagine our chief of police over there, and I will have a question for you later, can speak on this more. But limiting sales dramatically reduced the number of intoxication as the only complaint that I saw when I was working in the ER. There were plenty of other things that came in, but if it's strictly intoxication, nothing else, I mean, I was bored working up there, which was great. And that was when we were doing the 1 bottle a day thing. I don't know what the hours we're doing aside from that, but I know the 1 bottle a day really did reduce my workload. Also on that note, I used to find people, I think the most I ever found was 48 bottles of liquor in a deceased lady's luggage that she was getting ready to import, and she drank herself to death before she could take it into the village. If you limit the sales per day, that becomes a lot more difficult. I'm not going to say it's impossible. People are still going to get alcohol no matter what you do. Oh yeah. Also, if Kotzebue is your business model for this, or who you're holding up, I would like to know, and see if this is a question for you. It's an unfair question because you didn't have a chance to prepare for it. If COTS is the business model, how did that affect their crime stats or their hospitalization rates? I'm guessing that unless they had other things set in place, it didn't change it very much.
Yeah, well, the chief can't talk to Kotzebue without an opportunity to.
Right, yeah. It's an unfair question on my part.
Withdraw that question.
Yes, okay.
Just, you can state it for us to be thinking about.
Yeah, okay. Just throwing that out in the
It's
air.
not fair to the chief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Anybody else?
I'm Andrew. I'm a business owner here on Front Street. There seems to be, I wasn't planning on speaking either, so I'm going to go out and pick up two threads from the last meeting and this one and the result in between. One of them is this issue of, which is smaller and more manageable probably immediately, which is the Front Street issue. So one thing I'll say as a business owner that I'd like to do is coordinate more with the Nome Police Department. I feel like, I just want to share like what that is like. You got people, behind the visitor center, this general area over here behind Mariskaya's and down towards the visitor center. And when it becomes this free for all, it can be overwhelming because I can go out 10 times a day and say, you guys got to go, you got to go. Well, but I'll tell you, I've come to points where I said, I can't do that anymore because they just come back. And so it's this thing of like, well, what do I do? And I'm realizing now that I never really had a perfect system. And another part of me felt like, well, if these guys are going to be here, I want to treat them humanely. Some of those people are wonderful people, alcohol problem or not, but also just maintaining good relationships with them because I want them to feel like if they're going to be there, I'm going to treat them humanely, and I want them to treat our place with respect, and I don't want to create any animosity. So there's actual risk of like, well, if I make an enemy here, what are they going to do? What might they do if that relationship isn't healthy? So I just wanted to share that something that I'd like to do is and maybe it would be good for getting anyone who has a presence on Front Street to come together and say, without making any major changes, what protocol can we understand between us and the Nome Police Department so that what we saw in the last 2 weeks, which is, well, if that is so, like there was a reduction in the amount of what's happening negatively down here, then that's a good place to start. And I feel like that's like the low hanging fruit. So that's all I want to say about that. And maybe I can make some time to talk with the police department and Drew, and I don't know, kind of be on the same page and look at, well, what is the range of how to handle the situations? Or if I want to change to where as a business, I just maybe fence off the back area. Maybe I know between us and the visitor center, those guys are overwhelming. They're just, and gals are just like, it's a barrage, man. It just never stops, which is why we're all here, right? And talking about it. And I understand that's again, the low hanging fruit, and that doesn't solve the larger problem. And, but I want to this idea I find fascinating of the municipality controlling and taking over the liquor sales. I really appreciate what Chuck's talking about because I think there's a larger problem and this needs to be an ongoing discussion about what is the real, what are the trade-offs therein? They're big trade-offs, and they go, there are things that have to do with people's ideology about the private and public sector. And I think breaking those down outside of, our ideological perspectives and saying, well, what are the real trade-offs here? What does a municipality gain? What would we gain in revenue? What does it? What are the health costs of the community versus the revenue benefits for that business? Where does that business located? I think they're out in that revenue is not staying in Nome really. I mean, they're providing some jobs, but there's like a multitude of questions to ask around there. And I mean, just on the gut level, I feel like if the municipality was in control of liquor sales, there would be more control. Maybe the last 2 weeks, what we saw was, we had this meeting and they said, well, we got to do more. But that's to me, that doesn't have longevity. That might be like, well, let's, I don't know what kind of training they get to like, for serving people and not serving people. And the bottom line is if there's a trade-off there between like, if this big business, this private business is controlling that, they don't have a incentive to their incentive is to make a profit, more or less. Like that is the primary incentive. And I think there is a big trade-off there. And if the municipality was running it, and I know me personally, I'm gonna start looking at some stats and try to figure out, well, how has this gone in other comparable communities? And I think it's a conversation that we need to keep having. I really appreciate everybody speaking, and I appreciate the vision that Chuck has in particular around values as a community and having decisions made based on those values, even if, some of those are hard and big decisions to make and big changes to make. Well, what kind of community are we? Do we have vision? Are we willing to talk about making those big changes, or is that just off limits because it's too big? And I would say that no, it should be, it's an important conversation. And I think alcohol is the bane and a scourge in our community. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Chuck, you thought of something else?
I guess I should take this opportunity. Either make
Stick
a,
closer to the time on that one, though.
thank you, John, for recognizing me. But on our, I guess, judicial or our law system here in Nome, our district attorney, our judge, I feel the community should put pressure on them to increase the fines of anybody breaking the law. The way I understand it now, that the fine is so low that they'll be whatever excused or released too soon. But if they have a larger fine, then they will have to be incarcerated. I know that's going to put a load on you. And I just feel that pressure has to be put on the court system. Who does that? Any of us can. This is our community. This is our state. We have to ask ourselves, why did those 9 communities go to community operated stores? And I just feel, but I really don't know, is that they wanted control. They wanted to control crime, bad crime. Probably just crimes that are too bad to mention. So again, I just feel that we have to recognize our citizens that have a street address. We shouldn't be limiting them. Our goal is to serve, protect, and whatever that minority group. And we cannot let that minority group affect how we live. Look at Front Street. Look at the different entrances to businesses. They're boarded up, they're gated up. That shouldn't be. We want our residents to enjoy Front Street. We want our visitors to enjoy Front Street. We want them not to see possible bad things happening. There was testimony given a week ago about some incident happening right next to a church. These things should not be happening. We're putting a workload on our EMS people. I'm going to say our police department and public works department, they're underpaid. We have to develop a good core group of police officers to keep us all safe. Have them paid well enough where they'll build their own home, raise their family here. But I don't think that's happening. Nome, we have to take on responsibility. I want to see my grandchildren live in a decent community. I think everyone else does. I think we're all proud of this community. But when we see these different things happening and maybe action not taken to prevent these actions from happening. And I think prevention comes better with a good police force, happy police force, not an overworked police force. So we know citizens, we have a lot of things to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anybody else think of something? All right, Drew.
So I'll be quick within 3 or 4 minutes, but just a story that I haven't shared much, but impacted me, and I just want to leave you with it. We have people around the visitor center often, and inebriates and people drinking open in the public, but I can deal with that. I had an instance where I heard someone crying, and I'm sitting inside, and it's, I could hear somebody crying. It's a young girl, and so I go outside, and I walk around the corner to the backside where we can't see, and there are the stairs, and there's 3 people sitting on the stairs. One of those people isn't with us anymore because of alcohol-related issues that individual passed away, a resident with the house here in town. And it really bothered me that those 3 individuals sat there on the stairs and drank while this 12 or 11-year-old girl cried over her dad that was passed out in front of them. So I asked, what do you want me to do? Because I understand the dynamics of it, and I'm not trained in dealing with that. And so I asked, and I said, do you want me to call for help? Do you want me to call police? And I'm a very ethical person. And so for me, it was a struggle not to just immediately call EMS and have them come down. And so what I did, she had her mom in the vehicle. Her mom didn't get out. She was the only one that got out. She couldn't get her dad up. He was beyond, what shape he could even walk hardly. But she said, please don't call. I know what's going to happen when they come. We've been through this. Please just help me get him in the vehicle. So I did. And I helped her carry him to the vehicle. And I go inside and I cry for like 4 hours. And that's when I realized that there are very distinct groups inside of what we're talking about. Whether you want to call it people that like to drink in public or whatever you want to call it. There are very distinct groups. And so because of that, there has to be very distinct routes that you go about this. And what you're doing isn't going to affect everybody in that group. Because there are people that just come here to have a good time, and that's the truth. But if we're not doing it for those people or for the community, we've got to do it for the people or the family or the kids that are affected by it. And that's when that kind of realized to me that I don't care if this person's not taking actions for themselves, so what? Then I'm going to do what I'm going to do for that child that's experienced it with their dad.
I went home and I thought, are they gonna go home? Is he gonna sober up and want alcohol? And what's gonna happen in the home? And I still don't know. And so I ask you to do this and consider the kids, consider the families when they go home, consider all of the things that are impacted. Consider the community and make some real action, make some change. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
Hi, good afternoon. Sandy Martinson, Superintendent at Amble Mountain Correctional Center. Come before you today, wanted to thank you for talking about this topic. I know it's definitely a source of conflict for our community, and thank you for the community for stepping up and coming tonight. I'm really just here to ask that you talk and then let me know what kind of stats or data would be helpful for you as a body to help to make a decision. Tonight, we are a correctional facility here for the whole Seward Peninsula. We're housing both Kotzebue and Nome residents. We do track data that would be helpful for you. So if you can give me information that I could help you guys with, that would be great. I'm open to that. And I also ask that as a group that you take strong consideration for health issues that this will impact. Definitely make sure Norton Sound has input in this, and to some level Amble Mountain, because we end up detoxing a lot of these folks also. You know, we definitely have our limitations, and you know, and so does Norton Sound. So that's definitely things to consider and for the long term. So that's all that I have. I don't know if you have any questions or if you would like to get information to me later and we could do the research and get to you.
I had a question. So it's a perception that, and this isn't for you personally, but for the state, when they release somebody that's been in jail or at the halfway house, that when they release them, they're basically released in the community and not necessarily sent home. Is that correct? Or okay, so
And then we do.
how does it happen?
We will pay for their airfare back to point of arrest, and roughly about 60% of our inmates are from the Kotzebue region, so we do send them back to their point of arrest, their homes. And then we do have Norton Sound has a case manager. This is more of a thing Lance could talk about, but she's very helpful in getting them to the airlines or getting them assistance they need if they miss their flight. I know that we will also rebook flights, and Norton Sound has done that also. So we will definitely try to get them out if we can.
That's the policy.
Yes.
Like I said, that's
Yes,
what that's
that
why I
is
say
the
that's the
policy.
perception is that's what happens, and that they get released and don't go, and so and I've heard that many times. I'm glad to hear that it's not that.
I don't have the data, but there's a small percentage that like no and stay, but that is a very small percentage.
Building off of Mark's question, I have been told that, some of the folks here have to stay here by orders of the court system if they need to interact with their probation officer and everything else. So they don't have that option to going back to their community. They, in a sense, are forced to stay here. And that also creates a housing limitation because they can't get into certain federal housing because of whatever their arrest may have been. So, the courts may be inadvertently creating this problem for us because of the probation requirements. And I've heard that is a portion of our homeless population in Nome.
I don't know what percentage that population is, but that is true. There are individuals that are not allowed to go back to their communities, largely due to treatment needs or to the victim issue with the victim in that location. Until they get their treatment needs met, then they're allowed to go back. Again, I don't know what that percentage is. I don't think it's big. Rhonda might know. maybe a percentage that I don't, because that's a population she works with, but they are monitored. They are supervised by the probation and parole officer too in town. And if they're not in line with the court orders, they end up going back out to Anvil Mountain to serve some time. So there's a process here, and there's safety and safeguards in this process.
Now, I do know that there is a perception that used to be that if they missed their flight and it was going to be reimbursed by Medicaid or Medicare, Norton Sound changed that policy, I think at least a year ago, to get them back to their communities.
Sort of question. It sounds like it's a small percentage of folks that are not from Nome, that may be either from other villages in the region or from Kotzebue and that region up there. You add those two together, there's quite a few communities from Kotzebue together. So if for whatever reason, whether it's of their own choice or they're restricted or due to health needs or treatment needs or requirements, when they are released, and assuming because they're from another community, they may not have family here, where do they go?
Definitely a good question. I think there's a variety of places they go. Again, Lance might be a better person to speak to this, but we do have staff that transition them out through a case manager into housing. And Lance could also speak to how many of these folks are housed. There are quite a few that are housed, or Rhonda might be able to even, because that's again your population, but there are staff that work with them to transition out into the community. They're not just dropped and left alone.
But I guess my point was even if they have case manager, if there's no housing, if there's no place for them to be, I'd say probably at least some of them folks that they wind up on Front Street. Fair question.
I believe that would be fair. I don't know that 100%, but I also know that, again, they would stay at the nest. I mean, their whereabouts are known.
Lance has his indicator up there. Go ahead, Lance.
Thanks. Sorry, I got a little echo. Hang on, I'm gonna have to. Okay, let me try again. Somehow I got echo. Bill?
I'm good on this
You're
end.
good on our end, Jeff.
All right, that's probably just the voice in my head. So, it's right, and there's a lot of effort in making sure that there's strong case management, as she said, to really get people connected with resources, housing, jobs before they're released from AMCC or before they're released from Seaside. Now, you absolutely, and I just want to say, I don't know. You've been referring to Rhonda Burnett, Sandy. I don't know if she's in the crowd there. I see you looking back, but she's just been
Rhonda Schneider's here.
helping with this issue, and other entities in the community are really standing up resources to make sure that people do have some options on where to go. Now, we can't house everybody, right? As you said, we have just a lack of housing, we have a lack of employment opportunities, barrier crimes, and so forth, which can be rather frustrating. But a lot of the people will at this time of year use the shelters in the absence of having another safe environment to go to. I can tell you between Nome Community Center and Rhonda Burnett that a lot of people have been housed. There's been a lot of good support within the community, but again, it's still very, very limited. So I know that speaking for Norton Sound, we are probably three, maybe three or four times a week or maybe every couple of weeks. We are sending people home, but we are ensuring, trying to as much as we can, that they're going someplace that is productive for them, that is a safe environment. Obviously, housing issue here is gonna be a problem, the housing issue in the villages is gonna continue to be a problem until we can figure out how to build more infrastructure. And I know there are a lot of efforts going on to try and look at that. But our goal is to make sure that before anybody is released, that anybody who's a willing participant will be connected with resources as best as we can provide, so they're not just walking the streets.
Did that answer?
Yeah, no, I was aware of the problem. I was just trying to, sort of practically speaking, where do a lot of these folks go? And it's very limited. So I just, and I know we're working on housing. And, it seems like for folks that are released and they're not from this community and don't have an existing family support structure, the options are few and not that great. So,
Through the government money that came from the pandemic, several of the hospital, Rhonda, Schneider, Rhonda Burnett, Colleen Dighton, they have been able to find housing for some of these folks. Not that I would describe some of it we're having trouble with right now with water and sewer in those properties. And a number of people, which has been a discussion in the last week or so, because I usually participate in these meetings, we're dealing with potentially 40 plus people being displaced March 1st. And how are our community organizations going to manage that? Because you just can't turn around and say, okay, we're going to put them up at, and I'm not saying this, but just an example, Old St. Joe's, you have to have staff, just like Rhonda has staff managing that facility while you're housing those individuals. Because right now, a lot of folks are in the Nugget Inn. There are some up at Aurora. And Rhonda has found housing for some of them. And some are in basically rooming houses that, we're trying to deal with from a health situation. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
So maybe I missed something here. Where are we getting 40 people displaced from?
You are going to be seeing with the Aurora and the Nome Nugget, not Nome Nugget, excuse me. I'll get a really nasty. The Nugget Inn, there are about 35 to 40 people housed there right now. And we have buildings that we would like to get people out of because of water and sewer issues. And we have no place to move them.
Well, you're not mistaken when you say Nome Nugget, but both of them have 3 words associated with their names. So.
Yeah, please send me your questions. I'm more than willing to gather data. Just let me know what to look for. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Here's the answer to some of those questions.
A couple things have come to my mind just in the course of the conversations that we've had here. First of all, we've also seen a reduction in the number of people coming into our shelter in the evening, highly intoxicated.
The last couple of weeks.
In the last couple of weeks. We've been opening earlier because of the weather. But when we open earlier, they come and go. They have to be in by 11 when we close and close up for the night so that we get people to sleep. So they come and go a little bit more when we open early. But we've noticed that their level of intoxication is lower, has been in the last couple of weeks. We don't know why that is either. But I would suggest that, there were a lot of suggestions that came up in the first meeting that we had. And I think there's, of the 4 things that seemed to be maybe the best ideas that came out of that conversation, I think if you do too many things at one time, you don't really know what works. And so if you do one thing at a time, maybe for a period of time so you can measure it or whatever, that's just a thought. We do notice spikes in the amount of consumption and the amount of bottles people bring in. And I've told you before, when people come into our shelter, and I believe in the day shelter, they can't bring alcohol in. We dump it. They see us dump it. They watch us dump it. Everybody knows we dump it. And when dividend checks go out, when the PFD comes out, when anytime there are cash allowances of some kind put in the hands of folks whose primary thing to do with their money is to drink and consume other drugs, we're seeing also a combination of some really crazy behaviors, because it's not just alcohol, and for some it's not just drugs. It cycles, and when they run out of resources, they'll drink less. But for someone that needs to have it to survive, the population of folks that we're talking about take care of each other, and they know who they are, and they help provide it for them. I think that some of the traffic on Front Street, I'd be curious to know. My office isn't quite on Front Street, but close enough. The folks that are housed in the Nugget Inn right now, some of them are folks that would frequent our night shelter. Some of them still will come a night or two, and we think it's because they just want to hang out with their friends. And then they'll go back to the hotel. Quite a few of the folks that are at the hotel are coming and eating in the evening with us, because they don't really have a place to eat, and then they go back to the hotel to sleep. So we have a lot higher numbers of meals that we're serving this year, since the option for the housing vouchers or the hotel vouchers has come up. But if people are living in the Nugget Inn and they're hanging out on Front Street because that's where their housing is right now, that could have some effect on it too. There's just so many variables. That's why I really think if we try one thing at a time, it might be helpful to know what it is that's working. The impact of opening early or the day shelter opening late, we recognize that we still need a break in between our two shelters. That is very, very significant. I did get some statistics from the police department comparing last year to this year, when we were all housed at the mini convention center, and our police calls have dropped to almost nothing since we moved back to the Carmen Center. So our staff is trained to do some things on their own. They've learned de-escalation techniques. They've learned how to recognize when folks are getting agitated by other folks and they're intervening. We've trained them to know how to handle some of those kinds of things. So we haven't had to call police as often because we're noticing, particularly with the staff we have this year, we have a really great staff that, and we've increased, we train instead of once a month, we're training every single week. And we know that those things are impacting as well. So I think there are lots of things going on because everybody's really focused on, we want to take care of our community members, and we want Front Street to be a place where we're happy to take our children and invite our family members to come and visit. But this small group of folks that we're talking about that have some real concerns, it's not just substance use, there's mental health issues, there's repeated traumas, there are other things that we have to have the permission to get them connected to services. And until they're ready for that, I think the cooperation that we have between the night shelter and the day shelter has been terrific, because we share information when we can, and we've been able to get help for folks. There is a small percentage of folks that do end up stuck here because of probation issues from outside of our region. Some of those folks actually get arrested here, and so they're returned to their point of arrest, as Sandy mentioned. If even one of those persons stays in our shelter for 3 months, that's 90 extra bed nights in the course of a year. And we see between 7 to 1,200 bed nights a month in our total. So that's total number of people, total number of nights that they stay. So it does have a significant impact, even if it's only 1 or 2 or 5 people over the course of our season. It does significantly impact the numbers of bed nights that we'll see somebody.
I just want to make sure I understood. You mentioned earlier that there has to be a break between the night shelter and the days, like it was what does that mean? I mean, right, because, and the reason I ask is because that, at least when I typically see the most activity on Front Street, is in between those break times.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious.
Yep, our missions are very different. The day shelter's mission is to help people get connected to services. That's not our mission at all. Our mission is strictly to keep people alive. So we provide a warm bowl of soup and a bed and a pillow, and we encourage them to lay down and sleep and get as many hours of sleep as they can until we have them leave in the morning. And we're only open 6 months during the 6 coldest months of the year, where the day shelter is working with folks year round. We know that we have some folks don't go to the day shelter, and we know that there are folks that go to the day shelter that don't stay with us. When we shared a space at the rec center and at the mini convention center, there, and we don't exactly know what caused it, but because we operate differently, the night shelter has everybody in there at one time. We have to be a lot more strict with rules and how we operate. The state day shelter operates during its hours where people can come and go and have the freedom to come and go and welcome to come and go. So they don't have as many people in their shelter at one time, and their space is smaller also. So we recognized that when we were all in the same space together, the issues that were happening in the daytime were carrying over to the nighttime, and the issues that were happening at the nighttime were carried over to the next day, and there was no break, there was no interruption or break from it. When we moved back into our Carmen Center, day shelter was still staying at the mini convention center. The issues that we have with our population during our hours significantly decreased. And they were happy to be back there. So just they get some fresh air, they do get a ride. The day shelter provides a van. They bring it to us in the evening. They wait on the porch till we open. They pick them up in the morning, especially with the bad weather. They're right there. They make several trips to take people to the day shelter who want to go to the day shelter. And I don't know how their transportation works during the day. We don't provide transportation except through cab vouchers, and we just do it if we provide a cab voucher if someone needs to go to the hospital, or if they need a ride home, and they're welcome.
I don't want to stray too far from the liquor store.
Yeah.
But wouldn't if I understand you want to break between the day shelter and night shelter, but if a lot of those folks are actively drinking on Front Street in that time, wouldn't that sort of exacerbate the problem?
Well,
I mean, if they're
I
having
don't really
more
have
time
statistics on what happens between 5:30 and 8:30 when we open. That's the 3-hour window, and I don't know what police calls or ambulance calls are during that time frame. However, we've been opening with the bad weather between 6 and 7 o'clock at night, so there's a very short window of time in between that.
It was two different philosophies of management, and it was discovered, and we talked about this, that it was a mistake that was probably made, that we should have probably had the people exit the building for an hour in the morning and in the evening. And also the resources that are now in the new facility were not available at the rec center. So it just, and how things were handled, it was a lot of stress on the Nest shelter and their staff, and then a philosophical difference with the management. And I'm not talking Lance, I'm talking about the management at the mini during that period of time.
How many are average staying at the Nest right now?
35.
35. So and I'm hearing there's 35 or 40 that are in hotels that are gonna be. How many are gonna be left or kicked out basically when March 1st?
We only identified 5 people on the list at the hotel that would have been our regulars that are housed there.
That's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, where some of those folks came from, we don't know. We do know there's one family with young children there that we're trying to work to house, because that's probably the most difficult situation. We don't expect that all those folks on March 1st are just going to show up at the shelter. I think some of them may have family members they can couch surf with. I mean, that's what a lot of folks are doing in Nome anyway. And I think some of them, when they had the opportunity to get a hotel room, opted to do that. So I don't think it's going to push 40 people into our night shelter, but it is going to increase our numbers somewhat.
And we've asked the hospital in Bering Strait to see if any of these are folks that are staying here from the villages, if they can be returned home. Because I expect, if you remember our discussion 2 years ago, when staff first recommended moving into the recreation center, there was, I think at that point, you were looking at an average of 50 people in at the church, and that's why we moved, so that there would be plenty of place to expand, so people wouldn't be sleeping on top of each other, literally. So that's where we are from a staff.
We've housed quite a few people in the last 2 years too, and that's making a difference in our numbers as well.
Okay, it's kind of sort of related, but kind of sort of not. Lance, did you put your hand up again, or is it still up?
No, I did not put it up.
Okay.
We do. I mean, there is a real concern when it comes to the Nome Nugget. Meeting with staff this week. We've got people in 21 rooms there. There's 21 rooms that are going to need to be vacated for Iditarod. That's a real concern. I hear what you're saying, Glenn, about how many of those folks can go back to other places. They're housed there because there isn't other places. Many of them are from here, as far as that goes too. So that's a real concern, and I know that Iditarod's a great time of year, and it's great for businesses and everything else. But certainly, putting 21 rooms worth of people, and that's not 21 people, it's 21 rooms full of people out on the street is really tough. Now, we're working to try and get alternate placements, but it's difficult. I'd like to think that there might be a solution, and BSFC has been really good in supporting all that. Might be a solution where perhaps the Nome Nugget would take an increase in the rate that they're currently getting just to be able to keep those people there, and then they don't lose any money. But I also understand them taking a ton of reservations too, of course, right? So this is something we need to be concerned about. We're definitely looking at it, but we don't have the answer yet.
That opens up a whole other can of worms. So, I guess it's something that at least I guess is being looked at by various folks, and we're not going to solve that one this evening. Anything else, or I guess we'll start going around the council members more here now for comments, questions, suggestions.
So, I assume the attorney's here to address legal questions as to what we can and can't do. So the whole idea about city-run liquor store, what's the process? Is that equivalent to the local option ballot question?
Yeah,
Is that what it is?
It is. I mean, that is the process. It would be by local option. One of the things that I do want to raise, I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to raise it earlier. I don't have the answer. It kind of pose a question, but John mentioned that there are 20 some kinds of licenses. I mean, there's a lot in Title IV. I'm looking at the local option, and it's got it up on my screen right now. It's sort of too long to try to read and make sense of, but it suggests 5 different options. One of them is municipal run, essentially everything. And the strict wording of the statute, and this is something that AMCO would have to answer, or I could research more. Strictly looking at it does not suggest to me that you can parcel out municipal run package store from privately run bars. Now, I haven't looked at that in greater detail, but the way the statute is written, it looks like damp, dry, municipal run everything. It doesn't look like a pick and choose. So that's something somebody would have to, inquire further. There might be regs out there or something that explain that in greater detail. But most of the places that are doing it,
looking at that map, but it seemed to be very small.
And then another question. Alcohol tax. Question of alcohol tax has come up numerous times over the last 20 years or more. And the answer for quite a few of those years was just flat, no, you can't do it. State law prohibits it. But so can you tell us what the current guidance is on that, and distinguishing also between sales tax on liquor versus a excise tax?
I'll tell you what, honestly, I can't do it off the top of my head.
Okay.
I did find, I mean, there is a specific, I've been scrolling through Title IV is just, is vast. I could look into it if you had a specific question and get back to you in a little greater detail. There are, I mean, that question you ran into, there is for something, and I just had it up, but it does lay out municipality cannot tax alcohol except for da-da-da. And I need the nuance of it a little bit, but don't have it off the top.
Could you get us that?
Yeah.
I mean, what we are allowed to do and how, as
Sure.
far as sales tax or versus excise tax,
Sure.
specifically with alcohol.
Or
Yeah.
does your search engine at your office allow you to search for memos that may have been produced by your office previously? Because I kind of thought we got that.
We did, and
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where I'd start, and I just don't want to. Those questions get, if I start trying to go off the cuff, I'll foul it up. So yeah, I could look at that, definitely.
I don't remember what the answer was either, but I remember getting a memo at one time regarding that. That's kind of somewhat killed it. Made a change. I don't know if it killed it, but it put some.
I mean, in the first few times that it was asked, it was just basically shut down. No, you can't do it. Period.
Right.
You know, end of discussion. Move on to the next subject. But I know that other communities have alcohol taxes because they talk about it. You know, so and yeah, what we were told is you have to combine it. So it's a separate tax rate for alcohol and soda. So you tax alcohol and soda at this higher rate, and then it's legal or something. But and then any sales tax goes before the voters, but my understanding is an excise tax does not necessarily go to the voters, that it can be enacted by the council after significant consultation with the voters, I'm sure, but it's not something that has to be enacted at an election. And there's different types of excise tax, I mean, different methods. I've been thinking about, I mean, just cutting off certain types of supply of alcohol, maybe it helps, but maybe also it just incentivizes people to find a way around it and they still get the alcohol. So maybe the answer is more along the lines of providing additional services that help to address the effects of alcohol and also help to address the underlying causes that drive people into a situation where they're feeling that that's the only answer for them. But those things cost a lot of money. So how do we get the money? And one of the ways to generate some revenue for that would either be this city-run package store or some sort of a tax on alcohol, which, in my opinion at least, is one of the, it's a relatively logical place to try and get the money, or at least some of it is, if alcohol is causing the problem or if alcohol is contributing to the problem, let alcohol provide some money so we can address it. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Okay.
And I don't expect an answer tonight.
No, I appreciate that, but I will look at with the prior guidance too and see what that was.
See what types. And the other thing I was wondering is nuances. On the excise tax part, seems like the type of alcohol that's really causing or contributing to the issue is these big bottles of high proof liquor. So I'm wondering if it's possible to do an excise tax based on like alcohol content. So a gallon of beer would maybe have an excise tax of $1 or a case of beer, whereas a gallon of 100 proof alcohol, maybe it's more like $15 or $20, based on the underlying alcohol content. And I don't know if that's something that could even happen. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Okay.
I do remember why some of the debate of why they didn't pass it in the past too was the idea that we're going to charge a tax that's going to apply to 98% of the population who uses alcohol properly or don't have an issue with it, to take care of 2% of the people who don't. Basically, fund the 2% of the people who don't do it. That it would be better to figure out how to get that money.
Yeah.
I know. I remember that was part of the discussion of why it didn't pass before.
Right, and that's part of the reason that I would say, based on this alcohol content thing, because the responsible drinker isn't buying, one of these 1.75 liter, rot gut things every night to get drunk. I mean, that is not a responsible use of alcohol. So, I drank 13 bottles of wine on New Year's Eve when I was in Korea, but and I got pretty drunk. But I don't think the average, 13. 13. I found all the empty bottles the next week. But anyway, continue, man. Okay. But that's not. That's not.
So I get what you're
See what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that's one of the things to talk about is what, if we curb any alcohol, is it just the hard liquor? And is there ways to do that? That would be another.
Right, and that's
It's
why
been
I'm saying
suggested
base it on
to-
the
it's been
alcohol.
Suggested to limit the hours or limit the amount of hard liquor that the package stores could sell to like 3 days a week or 4 hours a day, 3 days a week to try to help eliminate the issue, because most problem that we're having is people drinking that. Now, people will change to something else probably, or they'll go somewhere else to use that liquor. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the other things I researched was just, can you limit, size and amount per day, and I believe you can. So I mean, that's one way to get at it. Now, you run into the issue of shopping at different stores, but nothing's perfect, But that is something you can do, is limit size. And municipalities can, restrict hours. That is, they have flexibility to do that specifically. I haven't looked at those. Do that. I think you start doing certain amounts of alcohol on certain days and you kind of run into just a sort of enforceability and you start to get an ordinance that gets kind of complicated.
It wouldn't be too complicated if you said you could sell it from 2 to 4, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can have them in your shelves, but you can't sell it.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like that would be easy enough to follow if you were a retailer.
Well, I guess,
I'm not saying that's the best suggestions, but it seems like there are things that could be put in place that are easy enough to follow.
yeah, but I mean, I mean, for that class of license or the, package dispensary thing, I guess it's, can we say no mono, for instance? Or can we say, no, only beer on Sundays type of thing? And, I guess frankly, if I chose to drink and I'm not doing so now, I'd want that. And just, I guess I would not want my right to get that, if he can buy the beer that he wants, 7 days a week, by God, I should be able to buy my drink of choice 7 days a week as well. And somebody, the other night when we were talking, I asked the question, is 750 equivalent to a fifth? And there was a lot of this shaking going on back there.
A fifth of a gallon.
Well, it's more equivalent to something like this.
There's a little over 4 liters in a gallon. So 0.75 liters is called a fifth because it's a fifth of a gallon. Really close to that.
Okay, well, it's, I guess just size-wise, that's what I was talking about.
Okay.
And I found a state of Alaska prohibition on you cannot sell alcohol in 1/6 of a liter container. And I don't have the faintest idea why that ever came to be. That's out there. There's one other, a tenth and a sixth or something that you can't do. I've never heard of a sixth of liquor, but.
Go ahead.
So I had some questions about, we've talked, a number of people have talked about these no-sell lists. And I don't know if, I'm assuming they're currently used or not used. But so my understanding is that package stores, there are folks that have state offenses that they've committed, that they're on some kind of a state website that they're not allowed to buy alcohol. Maybe it's they're on probation or various legal issues that they're not allowed to do. And I think there was a program, or maybe it's even still a program, where the driver's licenses are identified if you are restricted from buying alcohol, as long as you are under those conditions, right? And I think as whether they're bars or liquor stores, you are not allowed to sell. And it would be an offense if you sell because you're not allowed by state law to purchase liquor, right?
Right, yeah.
So the question I have is, as can package stores go beyond that? Can they create a no-sell list of folks that are not, that maybe they have a history of, trying to purchase when they're intoxicated, or maybe they've caught them trying to buy for their runner or buy for somebody else. Can the state or can these establishments create a no-sell list, basically kind of like Chuck was saying, we refuse the right to serve anyone we choose? Can they legally enforce that? And if they can then the Nome Police Department also, or the city could enact an ordinance about selling to folks on these no-sell lists of which the liquor stores create. And I know it opens a lot of issues, but I just want
it does. I mean, I think the first question is, I believe, as a private industry, they could say, we think you use this irresponsibly and, don't want to do it. So, it almost, and then could the police enforce an ordinance that says that if a no-sell that trying to buy in violation of the private sector's no sell list is enforceable by law. It's arguably possible. I mean, in the same way that a trespass sort of would be, right? I mean, you could kind of say if somebody's told you not to be there, then the police can enforce that. So
That's a great analogy. And
yeah, I think that's how that would work.
so where I was going with this is if, you know, and I don't know, there was a letter from the police officer. In the packet. And I don't think he's here tonight, but he basically said that he didn't think that these no-sell lists are really that effective. You know, it'd be great to hear from a law enforcement perspective why they don't work. But assuming that if, I guess, here's my thought process. You know, there's two owners, package stores, they create no-sell lists, you know, of not only the folks that aren't allowed by state law to purchase alcohol, but also another, you know, the additional folks that they've had challenges with, problems with, a history of, and then they share that with each other. They also share it with the Nome Police Department. And, you know, based on whatever basis that they decide, and then the police department can use that no-sell list as an enforcement tool to make sure. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just throwing it out there to say, okay, we've got this list, everybody agrees, and then basically have the police department use that as sort of an ability to, okay, there's a violation or something. Is that possible or realistic?
It might be. The problem with that is you're starting to put a lot of, once if it's created by private people, that's one thing, that's kind of their issue. The minute it starts being shared, for one thing, the public can say, give me your list. And, you know, it's a public document at some point, but that's complicated. You got, I mean, you're saying that people have a problem with alcohol, it's kind of a medical condition. So you're creating a list that's kind of a touchy thing. What are the limitations on the list? Who can have access to it? I see issues with that. That concerns me a little bit because one of the criteria to get on the list, and then suddenly the liquor store owner doesn't like you, so they put you on the list. Then the list is published. It just gets a little.
I remember in the old days, when businesses would get bad checks, they would put them on the counter.
Yeah.
For everybody to see, and then I think they actually created some laws or something that said that's based on invasion of people's privacy. You can't do that.
Right. That's the same
So that's
problem.
kind of
To the extent the businesses find it useful, that'd be probably great. But you start sharing it, and then you've got a list that is a privacy issue.
You may have some more, but I'm gonna call on Adam here for a second if he has anything that he'd like to say, as he's gonna have to sign off in a few minutes.
No, I'm good.
I'm good.
Just
Listening.
Appreciate it though.
Thanks.
Right, Adam, well, I hope you feel better. All right. Okay,
Just a quick comment on Scott's question. From the police department standpoint, I think the easier way to address that is for the liquor store to trespass the individuals that they don't want in the store for whatever reason. And that gives us the reason then to enforce the trespass law.
That already exists.
That's the easier route.
Yeah, that's the track I was kind of going down a little bit, but yeah.
Ken, you had a comment?
Yeah. So my thought was regarding kind of the going down the same road Scott was relative to doing a really good job of tracking how much an individual picks up in a particular time period and how we go about sharing that and doing that. One scheme that I can see potentially, whether or not it's legal, I don't know, but if no one can buy alcohol without a government approved ID. They usually all got barcodes on them. So it means creating a database when you go to an alcohol store. If you're going to buy alcohol, you got to show your ID. It's scanned and it goes to a central server. Internet connectivity, and the central server, and bang, you're on your sale is immediately recorded. You can't go to another store and redo it because they'll catch up to you. Now, I realize there's problems with connectivity and all that happy horsery that could be wrinkles that could be worked out. We got local servers and maybe they'd only update once every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something. But given that, okay, so then but then the question is and then anytime there's a public record where someone is saying, okay, get convicted of a crime and that's going to be connected onto their driver's license. It is already, apparently. And then perhaps there's another within the municipality for that sale. Perhaps there's another spot for the Nome police to comment. And if you get on their list, then they can put a no sale comment on you for I guess they could not take you right away without due process. So there would be some level of conformity to that, to preserving those rights. Anyway, so if that kind of a process would be legal, that strikes me as being a relatively simple, quick, and effective manner of getting a handle on keeping tabs of how much someone buys within a time period. And the other thing I really want to emphasize is Rhonda's comments earlier about not changing too many things too fast. You know, this is a big multivariable equation. And so if we change more than one variable at a time, trying to use the same data set for results, it just doesn't work. So we got to be real careful about how fast we move with some of this, despite our anxiousness to resolve the situation as expeditiously as possible. Anyway, that was
Thanks for your input. I don't know that connectivity would be the highest problem with what you suggest.
I sure wish it would be. Okay.
All right. Doug was wanting to get in here.
Most of the solutions we've come up with so far have been aimed at the general public, hoping that we will capture a small portion of the general public. You're right, and need to have alcohol maybe, or not necessarily our business as long as you mind your own business. So maybe the issue we should be looking at is, at least as a, and I realize it's probably some bureaucracy that's a pain in the butt. However, if you misbehave, you now have a restriction on the amount of time until you can purchase alcohol. I don't know what that would be. Blah, blah, blah. But we have rules on the books right now that allow these things. Open container. I don't know what the deal is with that, but we had a point here where oh, sorry, we can't be pouring out people's alcohol. I see it's still on our books. I don't know what the issue is with, maybe we're not doing it. Drinking in a public place. That's not supposed to happen either. Drunk on licensed premises. Any violation, including alcohol. Domestic violence, DWI, violation of conditions, harassment. People are harassed every single day walking down the street just because they can be. These are all citable offenses. Doesn't mean you have to fine them a bunch of money. They don't have any money except for what they're buying stuff with. But how we prosecute city laws compared to state laws, I'm not sure. But apparently that causes some problems. But if we push this or something like it, every time every time somebody is convicted of something, that means you have to go out and catch them doing something. Cite them, and then they show up before somebody. And then be proved that that's what happened. Now, you give them X amount of time before they can legally purchase alcohol again, and you publish that list to the alcohol salesman. So if you behave yourself, you get to do more or less what you want to do. If you're misbehaving and creating a problem, we attempt to modify your behavior. I believe this probably causes a whole bunch of hassle for those two guys back there. But I think in the long run, at least in step one, that might be, that or something similar, might be a way to attempt to curb bad behavior at least. Mostly that's what the problem is bad behavior. Oh, there's people out standing on the street, drunk, puking on the sidewalk, bugging people walking by. Maybe along with that, like some of the other folks, we attempt to get these people who are problems, we now have the ability to zero in on some of them and figure out how to get them into some sort of a treatment program. Give them a reason to do something besides just hang out and drink.
Thank you.
May I?
Go ahead.
So just to give a little bit of history, when I came out here as Alaska State Trooper, the court system provided a list, whether they were convicted of a city crime or a state crime, of people that had these type of conditions, and it was published weekly, provided to all law enforcement in the region. I carried one in my vest, and if I was walking up and down Front Street and I didn't know who you were, find out who you were, I could look on the list, and I had the ability to search you and dump your bottle out, open or unopened, because the court system was providing that you couldn't have the alcohol. The list kind of went away. The person doing the list over at the DA's office stopped doing the list. I think right now the stores are making their own list of people that are unacceptable behavior in the store. I don't know if they're actually going and getting a list from this at the state level, but it was very productive, and you could see our local police officers were on Front Street doing exactly what Doug is talking about. They had the ability to look on the list. Now you can have the list on your phone, for crying out loud. You wouldn't have to have a piece of paper. And go through that. The stores got the list. They left it sitting on the counter, and they every time they carded somebody. And really the nice thing about that for the stores is then they're not discriminating against somebody. Somebody can't say you're not selling to me because I'm too tall or too short or too fat or native or whatnot. It's no, the state says you have these conditions. Now, I think there's a good reason for stores to have a trespass list of people they don't want in their store. That makes sense. But if we can get the courts and through the legal system, maybe from Sandy, because Sandy has those tools available to her. And then I know a couple of years ago, there was a push for a drug and alcohol court. Those things are magical in the communities that have them because all you're dealing with are people that have drug and alcohol problems, and they get processed through pretty quick. And they're not tied up in the other court system. It's not overburdening the regular court system with what, quite frankly, is a harassment charge or a DC charge. So I think Doug's onto something there. I'm still in favor of limiting some hours and limiting the size of bottles or limiting the quantity of bottles you can buy in a day. But those tools have existed. And you go back 20 years and you watch Droke and Redburn out here dumping out bottles all day long. I think those tools are available to us. We just got to kind of force the court and the legal system into providing that list again.
And when they stopped doing it and we questioned them about it, they said, "Oh, the list is available to you. It's called Court View."
Have you tried using Court View?
Yeah.
Yeah. A little cumbersome for that project.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I've asked the police chief to look into something that was brought to our attention that the Brown Jug is doing, at least as an experiment, which kind of ties into what Member Johnson was talking about, and is tied into the courts. Apparently, there is a reader available that someone would have to swipe their driver's license or their state ID, which would automatically inform the store that this person was not to be sold alcohol because it would be a violation of probation or whatever restrictions that have been put on the door. So I've asked the chief to reach out to Brown Jug, to verify this is accurate based on what we were told just the other day. So that may be another way. And we did ask earlier today our lawyer about Sam about just taking people's bottles from them and who can pour them out.
The answer is?
Well, we were talking about, yeah, I think
a police officer could do that because the alternative is, I will cite you, I will arrest you. Some question in my mind about whether that's something that you could, I don't know that somebody who doesn't have that authority can just grab it and do that. That to me is taking somebody's stuff. So if it's taking someone's property. So the question was, if a community service officer, for example, has citation writing authority and can offer that alternative to, I will issue a citation, or you can let me dump that out. That seems completely plausible. And that's how kids have been getting away with drinking forever. But to just say, give me that, I don't see where there's authority to necessarily do that.
So you can't confiscate an open container when they have a law this or a piece of legislation that says you can't have the open container.
Open container in public place.
I think I don't know that you.
Let's have you research that so you give us.
Because I'm gonna come up and cite you, and then if I can't take your bottle and you still have it, I'm gonna cite you again. How long is that gonna go on? By the end of the night, I've got 35 citations here for this one guy who sat here and drank his bottle.
Great, he should be on no buy list for a year.
Well, certainly, but I mean, there has to be. If we try it.
We have Councilmember Topcott that's been sitting in the background here on the phone and Sig, call on you here, give you an opportunity.
Sorry, I'm in my phone in the device kind of I'm getting a lot of feedback when I talk, so I'm just gonna be quiet. But I appreciate the discussion. I'm definitely go back and listen to the recording.
Okay, great, thank you. Again, anybody here? Do we want to give any instructions to the attorney for suggestions on things to pursue, or have we gathered a bunch of information now? I guess we've asked for a couple of things from him, but is there anything of these laundry list of options that should be first steps? I guess my first step is cut the hours and cut it back to 1 to 7 every day of the week.
For everything. Liquor, no discrimination between liquor or beer, just open hours.
1 to 7, that's, 1 o'clock is when we open on Sunday. We open on, and, maybe that's a little bit long. Keeping in, I guess, having listened to Paul's comment about, how late do people want to be working, taking and responding to emergency calls, keeping it open on that end. And then, I guess, trying to also recognize that there, on all these issues, people comment that don't necessarily comment in meeting. There are things that we get by email and text and Facebook and yada, yada, yada. And, there are those that say, gee, I need to have an opportunity to when I get off work, to be able to make my purchase. And they always could hit it under 10 o'clock, but I think we can cut back on that end too. So just as a suggestion, 1 to 7.
John, my observations are that whenever the liquor store's open, and about 3 hours later is when the bulk of the ambulance calls. So the front end, the opening time versus the closing time, is really the more important of those two numbers. So, 1 o'clock seems reasonable because then we're 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening still. We're not into too late in the day.
What about security personnel? That's been brought up. My thought process, if we go down that road, requiring each location to have their own, I don't know if you want to call it a door person or security guard kind of has a bad connotation to it sometimes, but somebody that is basically responsible for controlling access, I would imagine. If people aren't supposed to be in there, they shouldn't be in there. but then also making sure that, you know, that they police not only the inside but the outside location, because I mean, obviously, you've also, you know, this location across the street where people will come out of the store and then go behind the building. And so those folks would be, you know, responsible for monitoring that. I assume there's no reason why the city couldn't implement an ordinance along those lines?
I don't think there is a prohibition on that, no. I mean, the question just sort of practical, is that the entire time that the store is open from 1 to 7, or is there a, you know, problematic time frame at the beginning or the end? You know, you're asking somebody to hire an extra person, so just, you know, what's practical, but legally, I don't think there's a prohibition on that. It sounds like you're not suggesting necessarily somebody with a security guard license from the state or something like that, but more just extra personnel, so the guy who's checking people out and that kind of thing has some help, extra set of hands and eyes doing.
So we heard when the last work session, I think when Alaska Commercial was here, they talked about adding additional people to it to not only monitor what's going on inside the store in the entrance, but also in the direct vicinity in the area to keep that, you know, hanging out, loitering, drinking, you know, those kind of things. And I know there was a lot of concerns about, you know, when we were talking about limiting this location and the problem would move to other locations and that problem would sort of change. And I think having those, you know, additional staff to do those things and make sure that rules are followed, you know, probably makes a lot of sense as long as that store is open. I don't know how everybody else feels about it.
Right. Security person deal with people on a public sidewalk? Question.
Call the cops.
Certainly.
Neighbors, my property. They can call, if somebody's breaking the law, just like anybody can call the police, whether they react to it or not. But if they get enough calls, especially from somebody they're working hand in hand with in security, they would probably respond.
City makes a shovel of snow off the city sidewalks.
Well, just on the thing about the security deal, you know, I mean, I guess it seems that if we're compressing the hours a little bit, you know, right now, it's, you know, there's 11 hours a day that liquor sales are. I mean, if we're pushing it down to 6 or 7, it's not exactly 2 to 1, but basically instead of hiring, you know, 1 person for 11 hours a day, hire 2 for 6. So it almost works out.
Yeah, you're right. In theory, you're saying it wouldn't really be an added cost.
Right.
No, that's a good point. Again, I think it's, if the city, legally that we didn't, you know, the city can enforce that, I think that's something I'd certainly like to take a look at.
Did you guys write this or advise on this proposed ordinance?
Yeah, I actually did, and the security guard, I mean, I just sort of sketched that in there, you know, we could take another look at it I didn't put inside and outside, or just because we hadn't talked about it, I was just trying to put something together for just conversation purposes.
It was based on, I gave Sam information from your previous meeting, so he would have something to draft or work on as a concept.
Is there currently a limit right now that at least the stores are doing to limit the amount of like sales, like a bottle a day or 2 bottles a day? Is there any limits like that currently on books or enforced? Or keep looking back at you, I think I see a Safeway sign.
Oh, well, we don't do bulk orders, but there is no, Safeway doesn't have a specific limit on how much any one person can buy. I'm primarily here to listen today so that I can get what's wanted from the community.
I didn't mean to draw you in.
No, you're fine. So I know that Safeway is very open and willing to changing to what the community needs, and the things that we're discussing here today. So I'm, you know, our corporation's involved, taking good notes to see what we can do to better the community. But I mean, I did have a question on something we said earlier, if I can use this opportunity to speak.
go ahead.
We talked a lot about IDs and, there'd be a list or somebody who's restricted on alcohol or scanning, an ID. State IDs, they're not the only valid or driver's license, it's not the only valid form of identification to purchase alcohol. You could also purchase with a passport, which doesn't have that red stripe and it doesn't have that ability to scan. So when we're talking about a list from the court, that would be phenomenal for retailers. I'm sure it's not a small list, but that would help us tremendously. And it's not like, this is a small town. If our cashiers have the ability to see this list and know right away, they know when that person comes in. Before you even see their ID, it's like, hey, you're not allowed in here. You need to leave. So I think that could make a huge impact from the business perspective.
I guess that point on some of that stuff not being encrypted or a data stripe on it. I think that probably is a similar thing with tribal identification cards. At least some tribes
We do not
that
accept
issue
tribal
them.
IDs for alcohol sales.
What's that?
We don't accept tribal IDs for alcohol sales.
I think you're required by the law to do so.
If they don't have a picture on them.
Well, no, they can have a.
For banking, I know we did.
Yeah, for pictures, I think you may be afoul of the law on that, but
Well, and
I could be wrong too.
I am a tips trainer, and one of the things that we go by is so it has to have that expiration date, date of birth, as well as a photo. And some tribal IDs don't have expiration dates, and some don't have photos. So the general consensus for Alaska is that we don't accept them.
So the reason I asked that question, John, is if the council was interested in implementing a restriction on like one bottle a day or the size, number one, could we do that? And two, how would we enforce that, or how would it be enforced?
Believe you can. The enforceability is a challenge. And that's what, and we were talking about this a little bit before the meeting, but one of the concepts that I put in is just that the stores would have to maintain a list which would have, they would have to have a list internally anyway if they were going to follow the law, really, unless they're just going by memory, right? And that somehow you make it so that police or whatever, the city can access the list. Otherwise, it's very challenging to enforce. You can put it on the books, and the likelihood that the police see somebody walk out of the same liquor store twice in one day, it's just not something that's going to happen.
Yeah, sounds like we got an open container law, but we don't really enforce it. So.
Yeah, right.
I don't mean that negative.
No.
I would ask, is that a practical step? Is that something that that you feel the liquor store could do if there was, say we had, say the city council passed the ordinance of 1 liter a day. Is that something that you as a vendor could practically enforce?
Absolutely, yeah. If that's something that's passed, some of the things I had been given, if asked questions at Safeway, we're definitely willing to follow whatever comes here. We're talking about opening a city-owned box liquor store. That's a lot. The IRS is involved. They're talking about background checks. Everybody on the city. The process for doing that, it would be a lot on the city, and it would be expensive. Where you have two establishments that are already selling liquor. If you want those rules enforced, that's what we'll do.
I think we can, what Sam's saying is that we can put them in, then the enforcement and what the penalty is the other part of it, because there's a certain, I don't know what the violation or penalty scheme is, where whether the city, whether you're collecting $100 from somebody, or it's something, where, and if it has to go through the court, that, a city policeman or someone could go to represent the city in that, as opposed to having to, bring a lawyer up to do it.
I was thinking more about enforcement against the seller.
Right.
Not really the consumer. And again, I don't know if that's practical or not, but say we did impose that, and then enforcement is simple. If they're keeping a list, the city gets the list.
It'd probably be a citation punishable by a fine, and it wouldn't. $100 fine isn't going to move the needle against somebody like Safeway. But the idea is that
It will move the needle with the chemical board.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're creating a record and yeah.
Safeway won't want to be on the seawall in the paper.
No, and I think that really got
That moves a lot of people.
Piece to it.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know what city council, but I would, maybe if everybody else was interested, sort of looking at a limit on the amounts purchased in a, one a day or whatever that is.
Well, I think the things that we suggested with regard to the quick stop license, that we should put those into an ordinance form as well now. Again, unless there's some reason that we can't do it, because I guess that was my whole point, is I thought that AC and Hampton should be doing the exact same thing.
Which was size, 1 a day, and
Security.
Right.
And I got bamboozled on saying this size, I meant this size.
So we've also heard from a number of people saying that we should look at doing a community or a city-run liquor store. And we've heard reasons why we can't do that. But not that I advocate for bureaucracy, but the only reason why those things work is because they have a separate ID that's part of a database that people that have to apply for that ID, and if you have a certain violation, that's already noted on that too, which would be a tool for the vendor to be able to use without us even running it. But we'd have to probably hand out the IDs, or we'd have to have that process.
Well, Brian has plenty of time.
That's the additional staff needed for that.
And you have your TAMS card.
SIG message that the new tribal IDs that are being issued are now all TSA compliant. So they're in the process of getting those into something that should be acceptable and trackable. She says, I'm fairly certain state law allows tribal IDs as well. So, okay. So those three things to put in an ordinance, and what about the thing here about some hours?
I don't like restricting you.
Okay. Well, I got that part of it written. I just have to finish the whereases.
Can I ask you a question? There has been talk about this, a municipal liquor store, and I think it would be very problematic to try to even, but I mean, assuming, we could do that, assuming, you could let bars, operate simultaneously with a municipal liquor store, which I think is sort of the idea that's been floated around. Assuming that's even legally feasible, and I would be curious about what the answer to that is. But I mean, I would assume that there would be an extraordinary cost involved. What do you do to the 4 or 5, package store licenses that are out there that companies pay money for? I mean, how do you deal with that issue? I mean, or could you even deal with that issue? I mean,
With the existing licenses,
yeah.
yeah, I was talking with Glenn about that today. I mean, there's a state statute that says if a city votes for, city run, that those licenses can't be, after 90 days after the election or whatever, they're done. Yeah.
Is that what they did in Bethel? When they transitioned, because they went through that period of, dry, then, or damp, dry, then damp, then wet, and kind of back.
I'm not quite sure how they handled that. I know I tried to track through it a little bit, and it did flip flop. I'm not sure how that.
It just seems like, my personal feelings is that, it's a lot easier for us as a body to implement enforcement. We can get pretty strict or pretty detailed, as a instead of trying to actually do it ourselves, run the business and deal with all of those issues. One question I have, and this might be for John or some of the other council, Brian, if for example the city passed some kind of, whether it's an excise tax or sales tax extra for the sale of alcohol, which I think would probably be problematic as well, or getting support for it, you can't designate how those funds would be spent, or can you? I seem to recall in previous conversations when they talked about this, well, it would just have to go in the general fund. You couldn't, for example, say, okay, we're gonna put a 5% extra tax on alcohol, but then we're gonna use it to specifically hire CSOs to.
That's in that memo. But if you find that, I think.
Yeah, I think the answer is no. I think it has to be, it's a promise you'll do it, and that shit can change when the body changes.
But then you look at Anchorage or other entities, other communities that have targeted taxes that are set to, I mean, their alcohol tax, and they have an alcohol tax. They don't have a general sales tax, so I'm not sure how that works, but it's targeted towards certain things. You know, this percentage towards this percentage towards that. And they got a lot of flack recently because they changed the percentage that was going towards homeless solutions or homelessness solutions. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's Sam's job to sort that out, but I think that part of that has to do with their organization and them being a home rule municipality or thing, as opposed to just a regular old everyday city under law. I think that might be where the difference is.
Probably has to do with it. I'll find that tax memo and get back to you on that. I was on all the enforcement stuff, and that's where my mind was going, and I just are going down guessing about it. I'll find that and get it to you and follow up on it.
I think we got 4 items on the list. Hours, size, amounts,
and security.
Yep. So I agree with those things. I'm a little concerned about cutting hours and maybe some restriction, but to me, I can support those. But I think we need to be enforcing some of the rules we already have on the books. I think we need to go out there. And maybe that means we have to hire an additional enforcement officer sometime, maybe a specialized officer, and maybe he sits over here with Drew.
Yeah.
And goes out and walks around, pats people on the back, shakes hands, kisses babies, does all that good stuff.
Right.
And just because
Mike does that every day, you know?
Mike doesn't have time to do that all day, right?
Kissing babies. Those aren't babies.
But put some responsibility on the people who are the problem, attempt to do some behavior modification. And by doing that, you're gonna eventually find that there's 10 people who are always a problem. And what can we do with those people? Can we get them in programs that allow them to do something besides drink?
Plus there'll be deterrents. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
right now, there's no deterrent, not a whole lot of deterrents. You don't have a fear of anything.
I don't think there's any
So really, the deterrent would be dumping alcohol. It wouldn't be a fine. It wouldn't be it would be basically dumping of the product.
Well, jumping in the product and a citation. We get tourists out here in the summertime. You let them off at the visitor center, and there's 30 people misbehaving, standing there talking to them, pushing them, saying things to them that they don't want to hear.
That's a really good point, and maybe we talked about it earlier, but if somebody gets cited, say for example, repeated open container violation, right? Can that be translated into a restriction of purchasing alcohol? That's where you're going, right?
That was where I was going.
Can that be done just by utilizing city ordinance?
And, state ordinance, 1160-20 harassment in the second degree. That's just bothering people.
Well, yeah, you do, it's two different things. Partly the state law is a lot easier to work with because they're misdemeanors and have probation involved in them. The city code are citations that don't have jail time and therefore don't.
So to be clear, I'm not advocating anybody go to jail or any of that stuff, at least not anywhere near the harassment stuff doesn't become a class A until somebody includes things like bodily fluids, like going spitting on people and doing things like that.
Right.
Which we've seen,
Yeah.
but if you're just bored and being a jackass, you should be on the list, and when you get on the list, that means you can't buy booze this week,
Can we make,
you know, in my
I
opinion.
like where you're going with this, I really do. Can you make an open container a local city ordinance as well?
It is.
It is
Already, yes.
Yeah.
So you don't need to implement the state.
No.
But
So the translation, it goes from open container to winding up on a no-sell list. for the package.
So the issue once upon a time
Right, that's
was
where
it
you're
was
going with it.
administratively difficult for us to deal with those issues. And then we came across the issue of, oh, we can't be pouring booze out on the ground, and then it all just kind of fell apart.
Understand. But if you could translate that into, open containers or harassment or whatever you call it, into restrictions of purchasing alcohol in Nome. May not mean anything anywhere else in the state, but in Nome, I think you've made a direct link
We're trying to
between
fix
the,
it. We're trying to fix it.
behavior you're trying to disincentivize.
Yes.
Is that feasible?
I will look at that. I mean, it's the trick is that with the state law violations, like I said, you've got this probation thing, which is just an automatic. I mean, that's the trigger, because the court said you can't drink for a year or two. Here, it would have to be some kind of separate ordinance that says first, yeah. So whether, I mean, generally speaking, most municipal citations don't have a lot of collateral consequence. You don't lose your, you don't lose a valuable license, or you don't lose your.
That's what you're losing.
But yeah, so I mean, that's just the question, is just to see if can you tether that kind of thing to a municipal ordinance violation.
Putting city ordinances on to restrict the sale and these other things, you could add a fifth one there.
So what is a Class B municipal like there these days?
10 days in jail, 30 days in jail?
Potentially.
Potentially, yeah.
Doesn't mean it has to happen. It just
Absolutely not, no.
I mean, maybe it's just the inconvenience of, oh, now you're on the list. And yes, we probably have to get the court to play with us.
To step up the city code to make it a misdemeanor?
No, that's what the state code is.
On harassment or something like that.
Yes.
But.
That's just a matter of just talking the police into citing more people for harassment under state law.
Maybe that's what we need to do. But I think, to me, I think that the overall issue is not that people are drinking too much, even though they are, but a lot of us drink too much, but we have it under control. If we have a problem where all we do is drink and we're out of control, that's the behavior that we need to modify.
Well, somehow it seems like too, a lot of these things that. Right. I don't know how citizen's arrest works, or, being a witness to a crime or whatever, but, it seems like that, some folks who may be exhibiting some of that undesirable behavior miraculously stop it when they see the car pull up.
That's fine. That curtail, I mean, that's the point, is that we need to let people know that Nome doesn't feel comfortable or does not like this activity going on here. So if there's a deterrent, that they will realize that this is, hey, that's not so fun to go drink at the visitor center anymore, because I kind of get my booze dumped out there and hassled, and maybe I'll move to another place, but then that problem moves, but also then the enforcement needs to move. If it moves down to mini convention center, then.
They just can't be at one place at the same
No,
time.
you can't be, right.
And I mean, you and I watched it standing across the street here
Right.
a few months ago. And I mean, we saw it going on forever. And,
Actually, like
finally.
four different incidents going on at the same time.
Yeah, and when we finally got an officer, he said, I can't do anything, I didn't see it. And it wasn't until they decided to spit in his face that, all of a sudden it became a crime.
Got his attention.
What had been happening to the rest of us,
Right.
it didn't matter. So.
But it would not only affect potentially getting the immediate effect, but it also could potentially affect your ability to buy it in the future. And that's what, I think that's key. I really think that if there's a way to connect those.
Right.
Easily, legally, administratively, you know, I would really support that. You get a citation by a known police officer or a community service officer, because I assume they can issue citations, I assume. I don't know.
Well, they may have to change a
But
little bit of it.
You get that citation, that will potentially affect my ability to go to the package store the next day or the next week or the next month and purchase it. To me, that will be way more effective, you know, potentially for the folks that we're trying to sort of change behavior than a fine or anything else, which sounds problematic to enforce anyways.
Well, I don't know that we can have all of these things done in a few days, but I think that the issue, probably because it's been discussed, I think, a little bit with you guys previously on the size, the number of bottles and the security and the hours. That should be a relatively easy thing to bring into a discussion or final draft of an ordinance that we can have up next meeting.
Yeah, I think so. Largely the infrastructure for it is kind of done in that draft.
And so then the stuff Doug was talking about may take a little bit more, so that is a separate.
The no sell list concept?
Yeah.
I think so, and I just need to make sure that all pieces together. But, yeah.
The no sell list is a penalty for being caught doing it.
Right.
Rather than breaking rocks.
I don't know where their no sale list came across the street, but I was buying some ice in there the other day. And so I did check, I didn't get to see if I was checked on that list, but the guy in front of me was buying a bottle. And boy, they went down that list as a few pages long. And that guy wasn't on there, so he got the bottle or whatever, but.
I've seen numerous instances where people do that. They go through, as soon as they get out the store, here you go. They hand it out.
Well, that's where the additional assistance with enforcement might help. Or not might, I think it would help.
So is there objection to trying to advance an ordinance at the next meeting on those 3-4 things?
Well, the other thing is an ordinance takes a 2-meeting thing, and so it gives
Right.
them more chance for discussion, or maybe somebody will have something that's against, that doesn't make any sense, then we don't know why yet, but, or you guys should think about this, maybe that would get added to it too.
Okay, we've got 3 more minutes unless people really want to sit here for a long time. So I'm going to give those 3 minutes to Chuck, and then if he's talking longer than 3 minutes, he'll be in the room by himself.
We got 2 more hours yet.
Thank you, John. I'd like to ask the attorney to explain to me again on the local option and listing those 5 options that you can or cannot separate from that local.
He was going to go back and research that a little bit more, Chuck. On the thing, I don't think you were ready to answer that.
No, I don't have an answer, but there's a state statute that describes the types of local option. And one of them appears just on the face of the statute to say municipality runs any alcohol sales, essentially. It does not seem, again, just on the face of it, to lend itself to municipality runs some of it's run by private business. It seems to be kind of an all or nothing proposition. There may be law or a creative attorney may be able to do something. I'm just flagging that as an issue at this point. So
He's going to get some more information for us, Chuck.
Yes, and then if the community decide to vote on the local option plan, do we have to show some kind of cause why we want to?
All you gotta do is collect signatures to get it on the ballot.
We don't have to show cause for anything, but getting people to.
just enough to, convince people to vote for it, but other than that, no.
I think your
Or you
question
have
is,
to get on the ballot.
yeah, how many votes would you need to get it on the ballot? I think it's
25%, I think.
25%.
25% of the last voting
the last election?
193.
Say again,
193.
people, we need to sign that. Thank you, John, for giving me the. Thank you.
You're welcome, Chuck. Thank you. All right, for the good of the order, anything else, or are we tired out for tonight? We accomplished something. Good. So, all right, if, no objection, then we will start, shutting things down. Thank you all. I'm gonna keep your bottles, Paul.
They're not mine, they're yours.